support and worship the papal religious power that will dominate the world in the last days. I'm Hal Mayer, reminding you to keep the faith.
Welcome back. Glad that you stayed with us. Let's get right back into the scriptures, because we were talking, Pastor, about the roles of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, how they were basically jealous and saying that Moses assumed too much. And then Moses, right. what I want to go back to and start on this, because I want to make this applicable
in other
to
words,
today.
Their roles were they worked in the temple. It was an exalted position.
Great role.
But they couldn't be priests.
Yes.
And that was too much for them. They weren't content with the role God had given them, but they wanted something, what they perceived was a greater role or responsibility.
And so it says that in verse 10, chapter 16 of Numbers, chapter 16, verse 10.
That's page 176 in your Remnant Study Bible.
Yep, 176 in the Remnant Study Bible. It says this, and that he has brought you near to himself, and it says, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi, with you, and are you seeking the priesthood also? Moses knew what was going on. They were jealous, and they wouldn't have even been happy with the priesthood.
Something else to bring up, Dwight.
Okay.
He brought them near to himself. Our viewers may not understand that when they went up, when they went up into the mountain before God gave the 10 Commandments, Moses went up with the 70 elders.
Yeah.
These men were among them. And so that's what he's saying.
Yes.
He brought them near. They actually were able to come up into the presence of, I mean, they were very highly privileged in what God did give them, but they were seeking
well, then they probably took that, you know, kind of got more prideful, took advantage or whatever. And what gets me here is that if they would have been able to have the priesthood, they wouldn't have stopped there. Then they would have wanted Moses' job. Because too often we can see the defects of people. You know, the weaknesses are like magnifying glasses. And I've always said that you cannot take people by the slice. Now, you know, if you have a rotten, or an apple, but it's got a little rotten spot, you can cut that out. Yeah. And then you eat the good part of the apple. But a human being, you know, people like my wife, she knows me thoroughly. After 33 years, she knows me. So there's some rotten spots still in Dwight Hall that the Lord is working to heal. But Deb has to take all of me. She can't just cut part of me out like you do a piece of fruit. And so we all, you know, fall short of the glory of God. And Moses, Aaron, you know, these people were human beings. But Korah, Dathan, and Abiram thought themselves so holy that they shouldn't just be people of the temple. I mean, I mean, let somebody else do that job. We're more holy. We need to be part of the priesthood.
So the Bible says basically, we go through a lot of different interchange here. We don't have time to go through all of it. But basically what happens is Moses had told them to gather all your men of renown, get your golden censers, put the incense in them like a priest would, and appear before the Lord. And so the next day, verse 17, it says, let each take a censer and put incense in it, and each of you bring a censer before the Lord, 250 censers, both of you and Aaron, each with his censer. So every man took his censer, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and stood at the door of the tabernacle of meeting with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment.
Now this is God speaking.
Yeah.
Now, and the other thing is, why did he tell them to get censers? Those censers with the incense represented basically the prayers of the people. In other words, it was a God thing. Yeah. This had nothing to do with man with those censers.
That's right.
And yet when the fire consumed, which we'll find out, the fire did not consume the censers.
That's right.
I mean, it's pretty neat, and we don't have time to get into it, but the thing of it is that the men were consumed, but the censers weren't. And those censers, that's why Moses said, you go and you get those censers, because it's like, is God with you or not with those censers? That was another test, really.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you bring up the prayer, because the censer was something the priest used, and it was symbolic of the prayer, the intercessory prayer for God, for the people.
Yes.
Well, all of these alleged priests, you know, we're holy men too. They weren't interceding for anybody.
That's right.
But who do you see interceding immediately? Moses and Aaron. They go down, they begin to pray. God speaks to them, says, you know, basically, separate yourselves from among the people. And it says in verse 22, they fell on their faces, Moses and Aaron, and they said, "O God, the God of spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin and you be angry with the whole congregation?" So immediately they begin interceding for the people. And the Bible says, in essence, if you jump ahead, God told them to depart, verse 26, from the tents of these wicked men, touching nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. So they got away from around the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents with their wives, their sons, and their little children. And Moses said, "By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own will. If these men die naturally like all men, or if they're visited by the common fate of men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord." And the Bible says basically the earth opens up, swallows up Korah, Dathan, and Abiram first.
Yes.
As to give everybody else a fair warning to say,
and their women and children.
And their women and children.
Whole
the whole family swallowed up
Yep.
in the earth. I mean, you can imagine how devastating and terrifying that would be. And then the men with the golden censers were
what a deal.
Still continued to stand there defiantly, and fire comes from the presence of the Lord and consumes the 250 men. Still, you have the rest of the camp that has an opportunity. In fact, they wait until the next day before God brings judgment on the rest of the camp, hoping that some of the people would say, "You know what, maybe we were wrong in following Korah." But the Bible says on the next day, what verse is that?
Verse 41.
41, notice, all the congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." I mean,
like they opened it up.
opens up, fire comes from the presence of God, and you have killed. That's how deluded they were.
Yes.
And really drunk with pride and wanting a higher position, or a leadership that basically told them what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Something we have to remember is this is right after Israel is told they're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years.
Yes.
And Korah did not want to have to go back and wander in the wilderness. He was among the faithless people.
To begin with.
Who wouldn't believe. Caleb and Joshua were faithful. The rest of the camp said, no, we can't go into the land as God promised. And they were faithless, and they had to wander in the wilderness. Korah didn't want that, so he gathered and led a little revolt and basically said, "You know what? It's not God who told us we can't wander, we have to wander in the wilderness.
It's Moses.
That's Moses and Aaron's idea.
Yeah.
And we're holy people, and God accepts us." And so they didn't want to do what God had basically told them. And so this whole rebellion was, they gathered leaders who would preach to their itching ears what they wanted to hear.
And think of this. There were 250 people that died. Those were leaders of renown. Not counting Korah, Dathan, and Abiram with their families. And then down in verse 41, 42, it goes on that they were complaining. And it says here that in verse 49, it says, "Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the Korah incident." So if you take 700 plus 250 is 950. So it's basically about 15,000 because you have Korah, Dathan, and Abiram's family. So you don't know, there could be 50 there, 20 there, whatever, but it's close to 15,000 people died, and they wouldn't have had to die, all because they weren't willing to trust in the Lord. What's it say in Proverbs 3, 5, 7, 11? Trust in the Lord with all thine heart.
Lean not to your own understanding.
Yeah, and all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy paths. And what gets me is that I want to trust the Lord. And as I'm thinking about this, even in our churches today, we have people, I believe, taking offices that shouldn't. People say, "What's wrong with me? I'm holy." I mean, I'm better than the pastor. We have this fight in all churches, even our own.
Yeah.
I think about women's ordination, and to me, sometimes we're so shallow in our thinking that we're arguing. Paul said, "When there's contentions, we're still carnal," because I think that we're still on the milk and not on the meat.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's been women, and they've come up to me and said, "Well, Dwight, what do you think about me being an ordained pastor?" And I'll say, "Well, what's the Bible say?" Because it really doesn't matter what I think.
That's right.
And here's what many of them say. "Well, I mean, I've heard pastors, I've studied, my sermons are probably better than most pastors." And I'll say, "You know what? I believe you. You're probably right. I believe that probably you might be the best pastor, speaker in the world. But it doesn't make it right."
That's
I mean, that's sometimes we get this, I can do better than they can, and that's what Korah had a problem with. We can do better than Aaron. We can do better than those guys. Moses, you give me a chance, I'll do better than you. We're all holy. This whole congregation is holy, and I believe that we have to get off of this. We have to humble ourselves and say, God, you gave us certain roles. You know, I know this sounds funny, but I went to a woman and said, well, I wished I could have a baby. Now, my wife has always said, honey, you couldn't go through it. She's laughed at me. She says, you couldn't stand the pain. You're just a baby when you get hurt. You men are the weakest wimps, that, you know, and she'll tell me that. But the thing is, I'm not jealous. God did not create me to have a baby, although he could have. Yeah. He could have done that.
It doesn't make you a lesser individual.
No.
Or it doesn't make your wife a lesser individual because there are things she can't do that you do.
That's right.
As far as roles go. And it's very important, whether you're talking about ordination to the gospel ministry, whether you're talking about positions in the local church.
Well, what about the family?
All the way in the family, in the home. I mean, God has set the man as a leader of the home, not to be a dictator of the home. And that's been abused. But that doesn't take away from the fact that God set an order, not because of some cultural difference, because it's how he saw things should run. Who are we to question the Almighty? And this is what we're doing. This is what Korah did. That's what Lucifer did in the beginning. He wasn't content with his position.
That's right. And
honestly, Dwight, there are times I'm not content with my position. Yeah. You know, that the Lord puts me in, but then I have to say he knows better than me.
That's right.
I've got to submit.
That's right.
I can either submit or rebel. Korah rebelled.
Well, Korah did rebel, and you know, I think of Deb in the household. She has always told me, Dwight, you can't have a two-headed beast. Someone has to make the final decision. Because if you cast a vote your way and I cast a vote the opposite, we got a tiebreaker. The kids aren't going to be the tiebreaker. And so the thing of it is that you're the one that has been appointed, and you know what? I have made mistakes making that final decision. Deb has never said, I told you so, you should have listened to me, I told you so. No, she said, someone had to make it. And you know what? I don't want to make those decisions. I want God to make them for me. The thing of it is that I love my wife so much. I am not a dictator. I love her, and she loves me enough to trust me to say someone has to make that. It's not about who's capable. It's about, do we trust God enough to allow him to set up a system that works? That's right. And that's what it's all about. And I think that hopefully that you get some of this, that please don't, if you're not doing something, don't think that you're less able. You could be more able. It's what God has called each one of us to do in our lives.
Be content where God has placed us. Be content with such things as you have.
That's exactly right. Be content. And until next time, if you study this out, you will have a better way of life. And so what? Don't put it off.
By working together, 1.7 million copies of The Passion of Love were distributed around the country, resulting in an unprecedented partnership with Walmart that led to over 1,000 Bible studies. By working together, over 6 million copies of the 10 Commandments twice removed were shared around the world, resulting in more than 20 churches now keeping the Bible Sabbath. By working together, we have shipped almost 1 million Bibles to spiritually thirsty Christians in Africa, touching the lives of 20 million people for Christ. Working together is what allows Remnant Publications to spread truth-filled books around the world to hasten the Lord's coming. Will you join us in that mission? Will you help us reach the world for Jesus, one book at a time?